El próximo panel es una discusión muy importante sobre lo que está pasando en Estados Unidos. Será en inglés para aquellos que quieran cambiar su canal de transmisión a la interpretación en español. Yo voy a hacer el switch para presentar el panel en inglés. Good morning, Julie Pace. We are going to then follow with the next conversation, the next panel, Press Freedom in the United States, the implications for the US media on the White House decision to restrict access to the Associated Press. We have Julie Pace here with us. Good morning, Julie. It's a pleasure to have you. She's the executive editor and senior vice president of the Associated Press. She's going to have a conversation with Martha Ramos. Martha Ramos, editorial director of Organización Editorial Mexicana, with 46 publishing brands with print editions and websites. She's also the president of the World Editors Forums of the World Association of Newspapers, WANIFRA. She was the web editor of Publimetro and editorial director of the 24 Hours newspaper in Mexico. She's also a member of our executive committee in the Inter-American Press Association. Until the end of the month, she chairs the Gender Equity and Diversity Committee, and next week she will be leading the Press Freedom and Information Committee, as Carlos announced today. Thank you very much, Julie. Martha, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carlos. Let me introduce Julie so we can start what's going to be a very, very interesting conversation. Julie, as Carlos said, is Senior Vice President and Executive Editor of the Associated Press, leading global news coverage from more than 100 countries. Since Pace assumed the role in 2021, AP has significantly expanded its digital news offering, being awarded 3 Pulitzer Prizes and produced an award-winning documentary on the Ukraine war that won an Academy Award and a BAFTA. Previously, Pace was Washington Bureau Chief for AP, directing AP coverage of the presidency, politics, and the US government. Before that, Pace was AP White House correspondent, contributing aggressively news reporting and sharp analysis to the AP News Report. Pace won the White House Correspondents Association Miriam Smith Award in 2013 for the work explaining the Obama campaign complex approach to vote turnout. She joined AP in 2007 as a multimedia reporter, developing and executing AP's plans for live video coverage of 2008 election day and the inauguration of President Barack Obama, a native of Buffalo, New York. In short, Julie knows what she's talking about. So, Julie, thank you very much for being today with us. I would like to start as we've been reading the last weeks. So we have read what happened with AP in the White House. We've seen the permanent disqualification and attacks towards media and journalists. Now we know there are attempts to cut fundings and cancel licenses to TV and broadcast stations. Well, we've seen that in some of our countries as well. But I would like to start, what are your thoughts about this? Sometimes this starts with a big surprise and then we get really mad and then we said, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna change now? So Julie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. Look, it's been a busy start to the year for us at the AP and certainly for our team in Washington. You know, I'll share a couple of high-level thoughts on where we are, and then, you know, happy to dive in further on any of the specifics. I think, you know, the first thing I would say is that it's really important, I think, to understand kind of who AP is and the position that we feel like is important for us as a news organization, which is we are a nonpartisan news organization. We're a fact-based news organization, and our mission is to reach audiences across the political spectrum. So we want to ensure that our audiences don't necessarily agree with everything that we're doing, but that they understand that we're not approaching our coverage with bias. We're not trying to be supportive or oppositional toward any particular candidate or president or elected official. And so that's really the approach that we took, certainly in covering the first Trump administration, and is the approach that we have taken to this second Trump administration, which is we are there to provide audiences with facts, with context, with information about what's happening, but we're not there to say, this is positive, this is negative, here's how you should vote. And we also take really seriously our obligation as a global news organization. We are working in 100 countries around the world. We have customers and audiences around the world. And so when we make decisions on editorial guidance, on language that we use, we're doing that with a global audience in mind, not a US-based audience. And so that was really, again, kind of the objective that we had as we started covering this administration. We also went in somewhat optimistic about press access because we actually we and the rest of the press corps, for all of the heated rhetoric, we actually enjoyed quite a bit of press access to President Trump in the first term. During the presidential campaign, the 2024 presidential campaign, we had photographers who were on the plane with President Trump, in the motorcade. I'm sure everybody has seen the really incredible image that our photographer, Evan Vucci, took from Butler, Pennsylvania, during the assassination attempt that really, for the president with his fist up, that is an iconic photo taken by an AP journalist. And it really showed kind of the approach that we took to this coverage. Certainly, and I'm sure we'll dig into this, things have not gone the way that we certainly had hoped. And we were very quickly targeted by the Trump administration for exactly what we intended to do, being independent, being nonpartisan, and making decisions for a global audience.
So is there a discussion inside the newsroom? What are the reporters saying? What's the concern now? I believe, and you just told us so, that AP is not changing the principles of how they're working until now, but certainly it becomes risky even to be around the White House for you guys.
Look, one of the things that I think is really remarkable about our team is they are just committed to doing their jobs. That's all they want to do. And so during this period, as I'm sure most people are aware, is we were kicked out from the presidential pool because of our style guidance regarding the Gulf of Mexico, which President Trump has renamed within the United States as the Gulf of America. Again, as a global news organization, it was important that we both retained the name Gulf of Mexico while also reflecting the president's executive order. And that was the decision that resulted in us being kicked out of the presidential pool. We did try to resolve that matter without having to go to court. It was very clear there was not going to be a resolution. We were not going to be able to change our style guidance on that matter. So we did have to go to court. We're really gratified that a judge ruled in our favor and upheld our First Amendment rights, and really the First Amendment rights of all media and all Americans. And throughout that entire process, it was about 2 months while we were in this process, our reporters and our photographers showed up at the White House every single day to every single event, only to get turned away. And they'd come back the next day and they would do it again, because that's just what they want to do. They want to do their jobs, and they understood that they were unlikely to get in, but they wanted to make clear that we were not going to be intimidated and that we were still going to show up to do our work. And I think that really just is a testament to the perspective that they have here, which is, you can try to shut us off, you can try to block us out, but we are going to find other ways to continue to do this journalism, because we've been doing this at the AP for almost 200 years. We've gone through a lot in a lot of parts of the world. And so it's within our DNA to keep showing up to do the job.
To your knowledge, what's going on in another companies? We've seen reactions from New York Times, CBS, PBS, and then as far as universities, but right now in media, Is there a discussion there? What should we do? What our position should be? Just in the conversation before us, Efe was saying we have a huge solidarity with what's going on with AP. What have you feel from the media around the US?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and we are very appreciative of FA and others who have spoken out on our behalf. I think it's a challenging time for media in general, and that's no secret to everyone on this call. And so I think that news organizations are, trying to make the best decisions for the positions that they are in. I can't speak to what the private conversations in other news organizations have looked like. But certainly I think it's, very apparent that, there's not full agreement on how the press corps should be handling these moments. And that's in part because in the White House and in Washington, the press corps is incredibly diverse. You have a huge range of organizations. You have large broadcasters, you have big national newspapers, you have small regional radio stations, you have international outlets. So it's really difficult to get consensus from everyone on sort of how to respond. And so, we understand that, it's going to be difficult to get people to agree to kind of collective action. And we didn't expect anybody to support anything like a boycott, or some of the more extreme measures because of just how hard it is to get alignment within the press corps. But I do think that process, how the press reacted to sort of our ban and some of the other measures that we've seen, it has shown that there are challenges in trying to figure out ways for the media to effectively push back on some of the infringements that we're seeing on press freedom right now.
So at the end of the day, I mean, there are ways to write the story, right? Even if you're not there, there's always a way. But of course, we're talking about an attempt to freedom of speech. Now it's this new culture that seems that they have a strong conviction on controlling the narrative, and whatever goes against what they're saying or believing, it's not true. It's like they control the truth. The rest are liars and traitors. How do you think that affects in the reader mindset? Because we struggle. We have the privilege of having a lot of information and a lot of context to see what's going on. But maybe when we are talking about readers, when we are talking about people that turn the TV on for an hour a day, have you the feeling they're not getting the whole picture? It's against what's going on with freedom of speech?
That they're not getting the whole picture about the freedom of speach issue in particular.
The risks.
Yeah.
The risks.
Look, I think it's a really good question. I think that I think the main thing I would say is that there's a lot going on right now. And so I think that some of this is just the volume of news that is happening means that there are probably a range of issues that, I wish that people were, able to absorb more fully or able to have the time to, fully dig into or understand the context of. But there's an issue with volume right now. There's just so much happening. I think the other thing that is important, and one of the challenges I think for all of us as journalists, is when this conversation around freedom of speech comes up, it's really important that we don't make it about us in the media. Like, we should be honest, we don't get a lot of sympathy, right? The press doesn't get a lot of sympathy, and that's okay. But freedom of speech is not just about us. It's about all Americans. It's about your ability as an individual to speak freely. It's about your ability to not worry that the thing you said, on Facebook, or the thing you said, at work, is going to result in the government retaliating against you. And I think we have an obligation in the media to do a better job of connecting the dots for the public, to say it's not about whether the AP is in the Oval Office or not. This is about whether the government can retaliate against anybody for the words they use, the speech they use, the opinions that they have. I do fundamentally believe that Americans care about that principle, that Americans don't want to lose that principle, even if they are Trump supporters. They know what it's like if there's a Democratic president in the Oval Office. They don't want to be retaliated against by a Democratic administration for the words that they use. So I do think it's imperative that we connect the dots a little bit more and say, hey, this is not a media conversation. This is about freedom of speech for all Americans right now. And then hopefully, you know, that becomes the way that people understand the seriousness of some of this.
I would like to open the discussion if anyone has any questions for Yuli. I have one right now. Lies. Do you remember in the first term that a lot of, I remember New York Times, Washington Post had this exercise of counting the lies that Trump said every day in his briefings, and they get tired. I mean, it was a lot. Do you think lying is something that's doing with really, really great success, that we can't go as far or as fast as lies go around the ecosystem for readers?
Yeah, look, I think this is a broad challenge when it comes to misinformation, right? That I think all of us face, which is that because of the way that information travels now, the inaccurate piece of information, the misinformation, is always going to travel faster than our ability to correct the record. And I wish there was an easy solution to that, but it's very difficult. You know, it's very difficult when something that is inaccurate, you see it get said or posted somewhere and you see how fast it travels. And by the time you as a journalist are able to put out a fact check, add the context, you know, say, hey, this is what's actually happening, the misinformation is out there already. And so I do think that it is a real challenge. It's also, I think, difficult because it's not one that is fully within our control. You know, there's a lot of debate around what's the right way to describe the situation when this happens, what's the right word to use, is it a lie, is it a falsehood? You know, there's a lot of debate over that. I personally, I think that we have to be honest that, like, we can call it whatever we want. we can do as many fact checks as we want. We don't control algorithms on social media sites. You know, we don't control the fact that a lot of people are being surrounded by misinformation because of the way that technology platforms are now pushing that toward them. So again, I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have. I just think we need to be honest that, like, a lot of this is not in our control as journalists, unfortunately.
Exactly. Fabrizio, did you want to ask something? Fabrizio Altamirano.
Fabrizio Altamirano from El Salvador. Julie, I want to express my admiration for literally sticking to your guns about the Gulf of Mexico issue. And I wanted to ask you point blank, since we have the privilege to have you on the panel, what is that about? Because it seems that it's not just a capricious, occurrence of the White House. It seems to be something a lot deeper. And I saw with profound admiration of how he stuck to the historical reality of being the Gulf of Mexico. Can you tell us what it's about? And if I may be so bold as to offer a possibility, if it's got something to do with the prohibition of drilling in the Gulf of Mexico and changing the name as a recourse to.
Do you mean what is it about on the administration's end? Why did they choose to change the name?
Administration's end.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think it's fairly straightforward on the administration's end. Two things I would say. The first is that, look, presidents do get to change names for geographic locations that are within the United States. That is something that has happened throughout American history. It happens all over the world that countries choose names, change names, based on, either common usage, culture, or agenda. I think in this case, some of this is just simply tied up in the president being a very nationalistic president, someone who, America first, right, is part of his motto, his persona. And so I think, we've also all seen the debate, of course, over, immigration and the language he has used to describe Mexico and immigration from, across the border. So I think it is very much just tied up in that notion of America first. We at the AP looked at this decision in exactly the same way that we have looked at these decisions elsewhere around the world. As I mentioned, we operate in 100 countries, and this is hardly the first time that a government has said, our preference on a name of a body of water, a landmark, is this. Will AP change this? And what we always do is we say, what is our past precedent on this? How have we handled these situations in the past? And how does that apply to this situation? And in this situation, when we looked at this, we, again, followed our past practice, which is geographic locations that are fully within the borders of the United States. The president of the United States has the ability to change that name, and so we'll use that name. And a perfect example is at the same time that the president was changing the name of the Gulf within the U.S., he changed the name of Denali, which is a mountain peak in Alaska, changed it to Mount McKinley. It's a peak that is fully within the United States. So AP policy is now to call it Mount McKinley because the president has full authority to do that.
Okay.
In the Obama administration, President Obama changed the name from Mount McKinley to Denali. We changed it to Denali. So when it is fully within the president's control, we absolutely will change that name. With the Gulf of Mexico, obviously, that is not a body of water that fully is controlled by the United States. It's an international body of water with shared borders across other countries as well. So we didn't feel like it was within his power. It's not within his power to fully change the name. Now, our policy actually does mention the executive order. It doesn't ignore it. It reflects the executive order. But we, again, have to think about our global audience. So that's a bit of context, for how we handled that situation. And we were very transparent about it and explained it fully. And actually, I'm pretty proud of the way that was handled.
We see it with much admiration. And the second question is, after coming back to the press conferences at the White House, after being allowed in, have you been felt marginalized in terms of being able to ask questions at the press conferences?
It's a good question. Since the judge ruled in our favor, we have been fully allowed back in for photos. So our photojournalists are fully back in the presidential pool. The White House actually, instead of reinstating our text reporters, the White House made a change to the pool. And what the judge basically ordered is that the AP can't be treated worse than its peer organizations. So that didn't necessarily mean we had to be restored to the level of access that we had before. It just meant we couldn't be treated worse than our peers. So in order, in what can only be seen as a move to try to continue to exclude our text reporters, they have actually punished Bloomberg and Reuters and removed their permanent wire text seats from the pool. So now they are not being treated better than us. They are also out for text, and we're all in a rotation. So it's we are very hopeful that we all get restored. We don't want anybody to be punished here. Certainly not in a bid to keep AP out, and we're very supportive of our colleagues from Reuters and Bloomberg on this front.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fabricio. Let's go a little bit outside the United States, because you have the whole picture of what's going on in a lot of countries. It was also talked in our conversation before us. How do you think things are changing? I believe that, of course, if the president of the United States has this position against media, it gives it's like gives permission to a lot of leaders around the world to do the same. It's not that they were waiting for him. We've seen that all around Latin America, at least. What's your perspective of what's going on with leaders around the world?
Yes, I think you're exactly right. I think this is certainly not a discussion that is limited to the United States. And I think some of the learnings go both ways. I think that certainly in the US, I think there have been people who have looked at what leaders around the world have done in terms of trying to restrict press access, sometimes through legal channels, through media capture and business means. And then I think there are certainly leaders who are watching what the president is doing in the US to see, if they can learn lessons from this. So it's certainly not an isolated situation. I think, unfortunately, it is a trend that we are seeing, and we really, we talk about this a lot at AP. There is no region in the world where you don't see some example of this happening. This is not something that is in the Americas. This is not something that is a kind of Western dynamic. This is happening in really every region of the world right now. And it's a huge and growing challenge for us. And I think that, I'll go back to one of the things that I said, which is I think that one of the things that we have to, think about in media is how do we explain to the public what is lost for them? Right? It's not about us. It's not about whether the AP is in the room. It's not about whether, our news organizations have the access that they have. It's not about, it's about the public. What does the public lose when those restrictions are put on independent media? What are the stories that would only be told when there's independent media? What would have happened if those stories weren't told? What are the other sources of information that people will be left with? I think that is one of the things I think about a lot. How do we make this not about us and more about the public? Because we are not a sympathetic group, and it's okay for us to be honest about that. But we are in these spaces because we are the representatives of the public. We are the ones that can help the public hold the people that they elect, that are there to serve them, accountable. And so I just think that's one of the things that, I want to make sure that we are thinking about a lot, is how do we connect the dots for the public, and not, again, make it just about us.
About that, news avoidance. I mean, the public is fed up with all the craziness around the velocity of how everything is going. It's really, really too fast. And of course, it's not only what media is reporting of what's going on, it's all the sound around social media, people not knowing where to get their information, not knowing who to believe. How do you think, because it's this idea we all talk in our newsrooms, how do you think we should deal with news avoidance?
It's something we talk about a lot as well at AP. And you're exactly right. I think that there's so much that feels so heavy to people right now. And some people respond by consuming everything they can about it. And a lot of people respond by saying, you know what, I'm going to just stay away. And so one of the things that we have talked about is, two different strategies. One is to try to find ways to communicate what's happening in ways that don't require you to spend 6 hours consuming news every day. Make it digestible, make it feel relevant, tell people the essentials, for people who say, okay, I'm going to take a look, but I only want to spend a little bit of time with it. The other thing that we've really tried to do is really focus on what we call at the AP, and I'm sure everyone's newsroom has a version of this: joy, wonder, and discovery stories, which doesn't mean we are not covering all of the very serious and heavy things that are happening in the world. But we are also trying to recognize that, it's not all terrible out there, right? I mean, there are great moments of joy in the world. There are great moments where you see, small successes happening somewhere, or just things, those stories that make you go, oh, that's interesting, right? and trying to make people understand, like, again, it's not all terrible. Here's something else that's happening, and hope that as they come in to consume that news, they may stay to read the explainer on, immigration policy, or they may watch the video about the status of ceasefire negotiations in the Middle East. Like, they may come in for something and stay for something else. And we've actually seen quite a bit of success with that strategy. Again, it does not mean that we are, no one can accuse the AP of not covering hard news and the serious issues in the world. But we also have to recognize, like, even I, who runs our news operations, I can't only consume heavy, horrible news all the time. I also need some joy and wonder and discovery in my life. And so it's kind of acknowledging that reality for people.
AP really early start, experimenting with AI. You were in AI very, very fast, I believe. We are. I was scared. I said, what are they doing? I mean, we are scared about AI now. We have it here. The last year has been also crazy, assuming that AI is a tool that we can be relying on in some point, and it can be really risky. Although I want to ask you about that specifically, and then where's the line? Where do we have to draw a line and say to people, don't worry, we are still humans taking the decisions, the editorial decision of what you are reading?
Yes, we've been a pretty early adopter of AI at the AP. We've actually been using AI for about 10 years. And that has been for things in the early days, things like using AI to pull together corporate earnings reports or sports scores, things that really freed up our journalists to be able to do reporting work that really only they could do. And that's really the same philosophy that we have taken here, which is not how do we use AI to replace our journalists, but what are the things that our journalists are doing that really they could be doing higher value work. I'll give you one example. Every day the AP multiple times a day puts out a digest of our top stories from around the world. We calculated this. We had an unbelievable number of hours of journalists just sifting through what we were doing, summarizing it, putting it together, and sending it out to our customers. Those are hours that our journalists can be doing original journalism, right? And we were able to use AI to do that summarization and synthesization for our customers. So that's the approach that we have taken overall here. I think that, certainly with AI, we all jump to the very scary examples of things that we worry that it can do. And I think some of those are very real. And I think certainly from a misinformation standpoint, we need to make sure that we are putting guardrails around use of it, so we are not inadvertently putting out AI-generated misinformation. That's why we always ensure that any use case we have, there's still a human editor that is the final sign-off and ultimately has responsibility for that output. We can't blame the AI. It's the journalist, the human journalist, who ultimately is responsible for the product, and we're very clear on that. But I do fundamentally believe that, like, if we're going to remain competitive as an industry, we've got to find ways to embrace the uses of AI that create efficiencies. If we become such purists about this that we don't take advantage of the things that actually can genuinely help make our work more efficient and allow us to focus on the things that are distinctive to being a true human journalist, I think we will get left behind here. And I think that would be really unfortunate as well.
What do you think about using avatars as news anchors?
It's a funny question. I laugh because we've had a couple of conversations with some organizations who have been experimenting with that. It's not for me at the moment. I'm not gonna. I would never say never about anything, but it's not for me at the moment.
Exactly. I mean, that's the right answer at the moment. We don't know where AI is going
Martha,
because it's going really, really fast.
I would like to ask
Carlos?
Julie a question. Yes. And thank you, Julie, for being here. And, we obviously the IAPA stands firm with the AP.
And we're so appreciative of IAPA's support, truly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are seeing now and in the last few years how disinformation is used to manipulate narratives. So my question is how is the AP countering that through reporting strategies, especially at a time when official spokespeople are constrained or even unavailable?
Yeah, very good questions. I think there are a couple of things I would say on this. One is I think it's really important as journalists to recognize when something is becoming a consistent narrative that is misinformation, and to think about what are the different ways that we can try to put accurate information out there. And one of the strategies that we have used is just consistency. Sometimes it's a matter of repeating the same line, the same fact about something in every single story that you use. And I'll give you one example. Anything that we write about the 2020 US presidential election, which was a free and fair election, but obviously has been criticized by President Trump and others as not being free and fair. Every time that comes up, we put the same language in it. 5 years later, we're still using the same language to make clear that it was a free and fair election. And I think that's one of the things that is powerful about misinformation is the repetition of it. So we have to use the same strategy on the accurate information, which is just constant repetition and not assuming, we did a fact check 2 years ago or an explainer. I'm sure everybody saw that. We have to continue to kind of feed the ecosystem with accurate information. I think that's really critical. I think the other thing that we need to do is we need to think about the forms in which people are consuming information. It is there are some worrying things, but also some really great and interesting things that have come out of platforms like TikTok and Instagram, just in terms of kind of the creator environment. And I think one of the things that is really great about it is that it has shown us that audiences are very likely to trust people who they feel a connection with. And that person doesn't need to be the formal news anchor with the microphone, right? There's the authenticity around that. And so one of the things we've done is we've often used our journalists and said, look, you're an expert in this. You've been our bureau chief for, Israel and the Palestinian territories for a decade. Just talk to the camera and explain, what's going on. Explain what your job is, how long you've done it, why people can trust you. Our journalists who are in the field, having them just very authentically explaining what it looks like and feels like to be in a place where something is happening. There's such trust that is built with the audience. And so I think constantly challenging ourselves to think about not just what are we saying, but how are we transmitting the information? Because ultimately that's our goal, right? Our goal is to inform people. Our goal is not to produce a certain number of text stories or a certain number of videos or a certain amount of audio. Our goal is to inform people. And that may require us to change the ways in which we are doing that. And I think that's really okay.
We're coming to an end. I don't know if there are more questions, but I'd like to ask you, have you seen aggressions against journalists in the streets from people, after the way Trump and his team talks about media? That happened in Mexico. So I wanted to ask you.
Yes. I mean, we certainly have, experienced, two things. We've certainly seen an uptick in online abuse and harassment of our journalists, sort of anytime we're in the spotlight, particularly against our journalists of color, female journalists, that has really increased. And yes, we have definitely had instances where journalists have been, harassed on assignment or turned away from events. At the same time, I will say, we've also had some really remarkable moments of support from people, on assignment, or people who a colleague of mine was saying they were just out with their family and they had an AP backpack with them, and someone stopped and said, "Do you work for the AP?" And his first reaction was, "Oh no." And actually someone said, "Hey, thank you for what you guys are doing." And those moments are really heartening. I think we focus a lot on the negative reactions, and certainly that exists, but we've been just so heartened by a lot of the very positive interactions that we've had with people over the last couple of weeks.
Here's another question. Has the AP established new partnership with other media to dismiss personal attacks to journalists?
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think, formal and informal collaboration that happens. Certainly the White House Correspondents Association is one organization that really speaks out on behalf of journalists. We also work with, partners like the International Center for Journalism to really focus on our preparedness for online abuse and kind of the more systematic ways that we need to respond to that. So I think there is, on this front, I think there actually is quite good collaboration and sometimes just sharing of best practices on how news organizations are handling this issue.
Well, Julie, we have 5 minutes. Do you want to wrap up with some reflections of what's going on, what's coming?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, thank you, for spending the time today. And I really, truly am grateful for IAPA's support. The organization was one of the first to come out quickly and support the AP, and we are very appreciative of that. I think the biggest thing that I would just say here is that despite all of the many challenges that we've talked about today, I think the moment is so crucial and so important for what we do. Not, again, I'll go back to where I started, not because as an organization at the AP, we are seeking to be oppositional or supportive. We don't have a political agenda, but this is a moment where there is so much that is happening of consequence around the world, so much that is reshaping geopolitical dynamics, culture, business. And so there's just so much really that is happening at such a fast pace. And that is where we can help the public. That is where we can step in and help people understand what's going on, inform them, make them feel empowered as they vote, as they make decisions. And so I actually remain quite enthusiastic and energized about the opportunity ahead of us, because I fundamentally think this is a public service, and I can't think of a moment where it's more important to play that public service role in ensuring that people around the world really understand what is happening, and again, arming them with accurate information is something that I just think is so vital. So, like I said, despite all the challenges, I remain quite energized by the challenges ahead.
It's a risky time to be a journalist, but it's a very important time to be a journalist. I believe we are learning a lot, but we have to say a lot. Also, we have this responsibility for everyone. So, Julie, thank you very much. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks, everybody. Carlos, thank you for the time.